This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise. Welcome to episode 5 of the Courage to Rise podcast. Today we're going to talk about giving up your black belt. I'm not talking about martial arts. I'm talking about the black belt that you have in beating yourself up and kicking your own ass around the block. That's the black belt that we want to talk about today. So for as long as I can remember in my life, even when I was a little kid, I can remember that I was just so hard on myself. And it was the feedback that I used to get from everyone in my life and all the way up through, really up until the last couple years. I would hear it from managers at work. I would hear it from my parents. I would hear it from friends. I would hear it from partners in romantic relationships. I would sometimes hear it from strangers, depending on the nature of the conversation. You're too hard on yourself. And it was true. I had a really, truly bordering on abusive self-talk track that went through my head. And the truth is that a lot of us have that until we have the opportunity to really look at it, to shift out of it, to understand what it is, and to do the work on it. It tends to run rampant in our head, and it tends to be in the driver's seat. And we call it the gremlin voice, partly because when we assign an identity to something, it helps us put a little bit of space between it, and it doesn't have as much power. It takes some of the power away from it. And also because it's really descriptive. It is literally the little gremlin in your head. And everyone has a slightly different variation of it, but usually the underlying theme is something around not being good enough, not being smart enough, not being thin enough, fit enough, whatever it is. That's usually the tune that little gremlin is singing. The common thread about it is telling you that you're not enough, that no matter what you do, you're just not good enough. And that gremlin was in the driver's seat for me for most of my life because I didn't really understand it. And, people would say you're too hard on yourself, but nobody could really tell me how to stop being so hard on myself. And until you really bring awareness to it and understand that voice is actually it's not real. I mean, it feels very real, but the things that it's saying are not true. And when you start to bring awareness to it, that's when we can really start to shift out of it, see it for what it is, and take the power away from it. And think about this in terms of how you talk to yourself. Sometimes literally, if you're in your house by yourself, but how you talk to yourself in your head. Like, what are the things that go through your head when you make a mistake or when you're in a social setting? Because this can go along with social anxiety, right? The voice that goes in our head. What are you telling yourself? What is the track that's playing in your head all day, every day on a subtle level? Is it telling you you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough, you're stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid, you're fat, you're out of shape? What is that voice in your head? Because the first step is identifying what that voice is telling you, what it's whispering in your ear, because it is 100% disempowering. And it's also not true, but it feels very true because it's all of our insecurities and all of our questions coming out as this gremlin voice. And for me, my fear was also around not being good enough. It was, I was told from a young age that, I was smart and gifted and all these things, but I never felt that way. I never really felt that way. I felt like I was a fraud and an imposter, and everybody just told me these things, but I was somehow, it was a grand ruse. I was somehow fooling them, and that this wasn't actually true, and that any day now somebody was going to figure out that I wasn't actually as smart as they thought I wasn't actually as talented as they thought I was. And so the track in my head that kept playing was, you're not good enough. And if I would make a mistake, it was, why are you so stupid? You should have done better. You're not perfect. You have to be perfect. And I know a lot of you can relate to that idea of perfectionism, and we're going to talk about that more on future podcasts, but it all goes hand in hand with this deep feeling of of not feeling good enough, of somehow not, of feeling like a fraud, and that gremlin voice reinforces it, and that track plays in our head. And for me, on the one hand, it sort of creates a false reinforcement and a negative association that gives temporary positive results, because when we have that track that's playing in our head that's saying we're not enough, it makes us push harder, drive harder, sometimes because we're trying to overcome that, or we're trying to prove it wrong. And I've had conversations with people about this very thing of, well, if we lose that, then I lose my drive. And I understand that, and I used to feel the same way. Of if I stopped being so hard on myself, my other fear was that I was actually secretly lazy, and that eventually somebody would figure that out too. And so I was afraid if I stopped kicking my own ass around the block, I would just be lazy and I wouldn't accomplish anything. And so it turns out there is actually a better way to do it. And think about it in these terms. If you are planning a diet or fitness regime, lifestyle, I actually hate the word diet. It's a lifestyle, and it should be a lifestyle. It's healthy choices, consistent healthy choices. That's a tangent. Anyway, if you're planning to go into any kind of making new healthy lifestyle choices, think about the energy behind it. If you come from a place of, I have to do this because I'm out of shape, I ate 6 Cheetos yesterday, so I have to go to the gym. That's pretty abusive. It is kind of abusive to yourself, and it's coming from a negative place, sort of punishment. And when you're coming from that kind of energy, when you're coming from that negative energy, it may accomplish the goal in the short term, but long term, it's actually going to be pretty detrimental. And it's the reason why a lot of people don't succeed in, a new health and fitness lifestyle choices, is because there's actually a lot of pain associated with that, because you're beating yourself up about maybe the state of your health now, the state of your weight might not be where you want it to be, and you're beating yourself up about that. And so it becomes a punishment, as opposed to if you look at it in a shift of that self-talk of, actually, I really want to honor my body, and I go to the gym because I want to move my body, because it feels good to move my body. It feels good afterwards. I don't know anybody that's ever said they regretted a workout or a yoga practice afterwards, ever, as much as we go into it sometimes not wanting to do it. But if we come at it from that place, then that's very strongly changing the associations and the energy behind it. And so it's not actually true that stopping that abusive talk is going to kill our drive. It's not true. There's also the other side of that coin, where when that gremlin voice is so loud in our head, it manifests usually in like 2 big ways, and it's either that you overfunction and you're pushing yourself so hard and you're on the verge of burnout because you're beating yourself and flogging yourself and coming from that negative place around it, or the other side of the coin is that you don't try. You don't push yourself out anywhere close outside of your comfort zone. You maybe withdraw. You maybe avoid social situations. You keep yourself playing small, because that gremlin voice is so strong, and it feels so much safer to let me stay in my little cocoon here, because that gremlin voice is telling me I can't step out of this, I can't be better, and if I do, then there's going to be massive pain associated with it. One of the places that this tends to show up the most intensely, and it's interesting because everyone feels like it's just them, and part of my mission and what I want, even these podcasts, my blog, the book, everything in the work I do, is to let you know that you're not alone. You are not the only person that feels this way. There are very common things about the human experience that we all feel, we all experience, and we don't always feel comfortable talking about it. But so the example I want to give, this was several years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And I have a lot of gifts in this life, and I also know that I have some areas where I just don't have a gift in that area. And this is not a limiting belief. This is just a true statement. Coordination, dance, it takes my body a little bit longer than some people to put the things together. It's just, what it is. And so I went to a salsa class 4 years ago, my very first salsa class. It was a New Year's resolution. And I went to the salsa class. And when I tell you, I was so uncomfortable, my gremlin voice was in overdrive. telling me how much I didn't fit in, how I was the equivalent of, I don't know if you guys remember the Disney movie Fantasia, but of the dancing hippos and the tutu. That's how I felt. And that I was so, uncoordinated, and that the teacher was mad at me because I couldn't get it. I mean, this gremlin voice was screaming in my head to the point of I was almost on the verge of tears. And now externally, I think, all the teacher saw was here was a brand new student, and certainly they get a lot of brand new students in there, but it was extremely confronting because it's something, and it's why a lot of people say, oh, I don't like doing anything I'm not good at. Well, the secret is nobody starts anything and is 100% good at it. You might have an aptitude toward it, but nobody starts anything and is good at it. Everybody starts as a beginner. Everybody who has ever been, talented in any area has had to start somewhere. Certainly there are savants out there that somehow are, that are born with these gifts, but everybody has to start somewhere. And so that was a really powerful example, for me at that point. And, I was at the point in my evolution that I could name what was happening to me in that moment. I could name it, which is about the only reason I literally didn't run out of the class, because I really wanted to. I felt very uncomfortable, very out of place. It was hitting on absolutely every insecurity I've ever had. But it's having the awareness in that moment where things are so intense, where you go, wait a minute. Okay, I'm feeling this so intensely. Every single insecurity I've ever had is coming up. My gremlin voice is screaming in my ear, and I'm going to stop and breathe. Okay, yeah, anytime you do something new, it's going to be uncomfortable. Breathe. It's okay. It's fine. These things aren't true. And that's the biggest thing, is when we talk about it, and when I talk about naming the gremlin voice and giving it an identity, it's like shining the light in the corner and seeing that the monster is actually just a coat rack. And knowing that you do have the ability to identify when that voice comes up. And this is, it may not seem like bringing awareness to something is going to be powerful, but it truly is, because it helps to shift it even on a very subtle level when you're bringing awareness to something that's going on. And so next time you're in a situation where you're feeling, you're noticing, you're starting to bring awareness to, what is my internal dialogue? What are the things that I'm telling myself on a regular basis? What's the loop that's running in my head? And this is even a great journal exercise if you have the opportunity to do this. I love to take notes on my phone, on my iPad, or on my iPhone, because it's something I always have with me, right? Because we're at the point where I'd rather lose my wallet than my iPhone. Anyway, it's whatever it is you always have with you, and take a note when you start to realize, oh wait, what is this voice? What is that voice that's playing in my head? And you start to collect information about it, and then you can bring awareness to it. Like, oh, interesting. My self-talk is actually pretty abusive. Like, what am I really saying to myself? And you can start to ask yourself, like, would I talk to my child or my dog or a stranger in this way? Like, would I say the things to other people in my life that I say to myself? Would I tell my best friend if she made a mistake? Would I say to her the things I say to myself? And when you start to put it in that perspective, you start to realize how horrible we are to ourselves sometimes. And think about, if you have a child, or if you have, an imaginary child, if you don't have children of your own, and you think about, wow, if I said the things to this child that I say to myself, how damaging would that be long term? And put it in the framework of, if you make a mistake, and not if, but when, because I hate to break it to you, but as humans, you're going to make mistakes. That is a 100% guarantee. And the most empowering thing we can do is learn to move through those mistakes in a healthy way, so that it doesn't turn into a disempowering state and a loop where we're constantly beating ourselves up, where we're telling ourselves we're stupid for having made a mistake, where we're catastrophizing this out when it really doesn't have to be that way. So breathe. Let's say you make a mistake at work and you breathe. Okay, let's get real about the situation here. Let's not personalize it. I made a mistake. How did I get to where I am? What led to this? What are the things that happened or that transpired, or the decisions that were made along the way that led to this? What have I learned from it? Depending on the nature of it, it might be, how can I fix this? How can I make it better? My grandfather, who is infinitely wise, God rest his soul, used to say, anybody can make a mistake. It's how you fix it. And it's true. And obviously we want to learn from our past so that we don't want to repeat the same mistakes, because that means we're not learning, but we're going to make all new mistakes. And the most disempowering thing you can do when you make a mistake is let that gremlin voice take over and tell you lies about what that means about you. Because it might tell you that you're just stupid, or you're not talented, or you're not good at it. And when we let that voice take over, it's going to keep us small. It's going to keep us disempowered. It's going to keep us feeling really shitty about ourselves. And it means that we're not able to really live a life that feels good to us or feels good to anybody else. And so if you make a mistake, give yourself grace, give yourself compassion. It means that you're giving yourself the space to look at it more objectively and go, okay, what happened? What did I really learn from this? What do I need to do to fix this in the moment, or, in the moments that follow? What can I do to impact this, to mitigate it? What did I learn from it? And how can I not repeat this again? That is the very healthiest mindset that you can possibly be in. It is the best way to create that pattern interrupt with that gremlin voice. Bring awareness to what's going on in your head. Stop it and start a new, more compassionate self-talk track. And what does that look like? It looks like replacing the I'm stupid, I'm fat, I'm whatever that negative talk is, shift it. Shift the language, because language is so powerful. Our brains are basically just a computer. And think about any computer, you program it with language, right? You have to use language to program a computer. So change the language that you're using in that self-talk track. Change the voice that has the presence in your head. It doesn't mean that the gremlin voice is going to disappear and never come up again. This is the reality of the situation. Everyone has the gremlin in their head. It's just a matter of whether you're letting it in the driver's seat or whether you're putting it in the back seat or the trunk where it belongs, right? And so I think that's a realistic way to look at these things. Is sometimes people assume that they are failing or not making progress because, well, I still have this talk that comes up. Well, yeah, we all do. That's part of the human experience. I don't know anybody, even Oprah, I guarantee you, still has some of that negative self-talk that comes up. It's just that you have the awareness. You know what it is. You can identify it. You can separate from it, and you replace it with a more empowering belief. And you don't let it lead. You don't let it stop you from doing the things that you want to do in life. You don't let it stop you from having the fulfillment that you want to have in life. You just recognize it. I still have the gremlin voice that comes up, especially when I wrote my book and when I do my podcast, when, there is that gremlin voice that comes up that goes, who are you to say these things? Who would listen to this? Who wants to read this? That voice comes up. Anybody who's an author, anybody who does anything that's vulnerable, that's putting themselves out there in a big or a small way, that voice is always there. You just go, yeah, that's normal. I see it. Yep. And I'm not going to let it win. It's just telling a story. The other way to think about this is that it's actually there. It came up at some point as a protective mechanism. Our bodies are infinitely intelligent, and it could be like, let's take a social situation, for example. We form neuroassociations very quickly, and it's part of human nature to avoid pain. So if you experience a lot of really intense social anxiety, or, maybe going into a social situation brings up a lot of insecurity, it's possible, it's not always, but it's possible that there was something that happened, God forbid, middle school. There should be guaranteed therapy after we all graduate middle school. But maybe something happened to you. Maybe it was a mean girl. Maybe it was, a bully or somebody at school that's created an association that's reinforced this idea that somehow you don't fit in. Whatever it is, that there's pain associated with it. And so when your gremlin is telling you, you don't fit in, you don't fit in, you don't fit in, on some weird level, it's trying to protect you because there was some pain associated with something like that at some point in your life. And so don't necessarily think of it as, it's not like this evil, horrible thing. Send it compassion. Like, maybe you showed up at some point to try to protect me from something. I don't need you to protect me anymore. And that's the biggest step in bringing awareness to it, is reprogramming ourselves, because we really do have control over what we let lead in our lives. And one of the biggest things that I think would be empowering for all of us on the whole is to realize how much control you actually have over changing your state, over shifting these disempowering thoughts and patterns that we repeat. And it's not in denial that, maybe some horrible things have happened to us or some painful things that have happened to us. It's just, do you want to choose differently for your future? Because I don't know about you, but I don't like to suffer. And I've certainly suffered a fair amount in my life. I don't like to suffer if I have control over shifting that. And pretty much 100% of the time, the one thing that you can control, and there's a great book that I definitely highly recommend. It's The Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, and it talks about, time in the Nazi concentration camps, and that basically the one thing that's left to all of us at the end of the day is choosing our attitude, choosing how we see things. That is the one thing that no one can ever take away from you. It is within you. And again, it doesn't deny that maybe horrible things are going on, and it doesn't deny pain associated with things, but you do have a choice in how you bring awareness to these things and how you shift them. And so I really want to challenge you to look at, what is that negative self-talk track that goes through your head? What would it feel like if that voice weren't screaming in your ear? If you were able to put an inch of space and breathe and go, oh, that's just my little gremlin coming up, and it's telling me some things that really aren't true and really aren't helpful for me. And when you can identify that and say, hey, get your ass in the back seat. We've got a new plan here. I'm going to the gym because I want to move my body, and I'm going to eat healthy food because food is fuel and medicine, and food makes me feel good. And I'm doing this for the long term. And so instead of having it be this abusive, black belt in beating yourself up, change that self-talk, shift it, and see how much more empowered you feel on a daily basis. Shifting that self-talk for me, turning in my black belt and beating myself up, has been one of the biggest keys in my own journey of self-worth and self-love and self-confidence. Because as I said, was I an overachiever in that, and there were just ways that I would treat myself, and to the point where, and this isn't an easy thing to talk about, but I guarantee you someone else out here has experienced this, that sometimes it would get so intense and I would get so deep into this self-loathing, negative self-talk, this spiral of just not being good enough. It didn't happen a lot, but I would slap myself. I would slap myself on the leg, or I'd slap myself across the face, and that's when things get really intense. And if you're sitting there and you're hearing it and you're going, well, gosh, that's not very healthy. Well, no kidding, it's not very healthy, right? And it's not that it happens a lot, but that's how intense those feelings of, really it surpasses not feeling good enough. And sometimes it gets down to even that self-loathing, and it's not something that's pretty to talk about, but it is a very intense thing that a lot of us deal with and work through. And that's why it's so important to talk about it and bring voice to the fact that do not let it take over. See it for what it is. Don't let it have that power. And the biggest shift that you can start to make every single day, because it's all about the baby steps that we take. And anytime we're making a change of any kind in our life, it is about the accumulation of things that you do on a daily basis that lead you to wherever you want to be or wherever you're going to end up. It's just like, again, making an analogy to eating. If you're making daily choices where you're eating food that's really not good for you, that's going to be damaging to your body and to your health in the long term, the accumulation, that it's not about having one day where you eat a treat. It's about doing that every single day. Or, a fitness lifestyle, it's about moving your body every day. And the accumulation of that is what creates long-term health. And it's the choices that you make on a daily basis. And when you think about building your self-confidence, building your self-esteem, connecting to your own love for yourself and your self-worth, that happens on a daily basis too. Shifting that happens on a daily basis. And especially when we've lived a lot of times the majority of our life coming from a place of self-criticism and self-hatred, self-loathing, negative self-talk, make the choice to start to shift that on a daily basis. And when you recognize that voice that comes up, and that voice that comes up in your head that tells you whatever the specific brand of jerk in your head has been telling you, bring awareness to it. Stop. Ooh, I recognize that. That's that little gremlin voice. What's it saying? Okay, here's what it says. I'm going to choose again. I'm going to choose to believe something different about myself. I'm going to choose to believe that every day I am doing the best that I can. I'm going to choose to focus on things that make me feel good. And the accumulation of that over time is going to lead you into that place of strength and self-confidence and self-worth, and give you fulfillment in your life, because it's the shifting of that internal talk track. Don't let it just play unchecked in your head. You have power to shift that. And so let that be your first step towards strengthening your self-esteem and your self-worth, is to change the voice that's playing in your head. And if it takes writing it down in one column, writing down the voice that goes through your head, or bringing awareness to it and the consistent, maybe it's a few phrases or a few things that you're telling yourself that you've been telling yourself unconsciously. And maybe on the left-hand column, you write down what has been going through your head. And then in the right-hand column, you write down what you're going to choose instead. If it is, I'm so stupid on the left, or I'm not good enough on the left, then maybe on the right, it's, I'm doing my best every day, and I am worthy of love, and I am good enough just as I am. I am enough just as I am. The more you interrupt that pattern that's been playing, that negative self-talk track that's been disempowering, the more you interrupt it and replace it on a conscious level with something that's a more empowering belief. Do that every day. Do that every time it comes up. Just disconnect it, disrupt it, and replace it. Over the course of time, that is going to create a stronger foundation for you to move into a life of greater fulfillment, of greater peace, of greater happiness. And the more in alignment that you are in that way, the more positive impact you can have on other people. Because remember, it's not just you. Everyone out there has this gremlin voice in their head, and it's about taking control of it and saying, you don't get to lead anymore. I am turning in my black belt and beating myself up because it's no longer serving me anymore. It doesn't feel good. And even if you don't yet truly embody or feel this idea that you are enough, even if it feels like the very farthest thing right now from where you are, just start taking this step. It's baby steps. Even if it's just 0.5%, start taking this step, start making this shift. You have to do this for yourself. It is no way to live in self-loathing, to live in always questioning if you're good enough. More than anything, it leads to so many problems in this world that if I had a magic wand and that's the one thing I could heal, that's what I would heal within everyone. It's part of why I do these podcasts. It's part of why I do what I do. And because I've lived it, and I lived with it for a really long time, and I saw the impact that it had on me, and I see the impact that it has on others. Think about, again, anytime you're questioning this, think about that little child or that best friend of yours. How would you talk to them? How would you encourage them? You love them unconditionally, right? That's the love you need to show for yourself. And the way you do that is starting by shifting that self-talk, that gremlin voice that's going on in your head. Shift it. Take the steps to shift it and replace it, because the truth is that you are good enough. I don't care who you are. I don't care if I've never met you before. I guarantee you, you are good enough just as you are, no matter what you've been through in your life, no matter what you might have done that you might have had shame around. You are good enough just as you are, and you are worthy of your own unconditional love. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.